I'm here today with WorldDenver Talks, and we are talking to Claudio Paolillo, a journalist from Uruguay. Could you tell us, I know you've been in here for this conference of I.A.P.A. Can you explain to us what that is?
Well, the Inter-American Press Association is an association of 1,300 newspapers from all the Americas. We have the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Denver Post, all the main newspapers of the U.S. and little newspapers also, but we have the Canadian newspapers and all the main newspapers in Latin America. So we are 1,300 publications that gather each 6 months to monitor the state of the freedom of the press in each country. I am the president, chairman of the Freedom of the Press Committee, and we have 25 vice presidents in each country to report what's going on in a daily basis or weekly basis. Something happened, and we write on a statement and we publish it, and we send it to the government, and we press the government if something is wrong. And the main mission, the unique mission of I.A.P.A. is to promote and defend freedom of the press.
You are the publisher of a weekly newspaper focused on politics and economics.
Búsqueda.
Búsqueda. And what's the circulation of that?
60,000.
60,000.
We are the tiniest country of South America.
Wow.
3.3 million people.
Amazing. And it's doing
but
well.
But Finland has 5 million people, and New Zealand has 4.5 million people. So there are some advantages of being a tiny country, you know, because everybody knows everybody.
Right.
And there is a sense of familiarity there. And also, we are a cosmopolitan society. We almost everybody knows how to speak English, and
that's wonderful.
And the level of the education of the people is quite good for in Latin American terms, and so now that explains in part why I'm the chairman of the Freedom of the Press Committee of I.A.P.A.
Tell me, how did you get involved in this notion of freedom of the press, and how did you get involved in the Inter-American Press Association?
Well, first of all, I get involved in an organization that fights for freedom of the press. That is the real thing. We had in Uruguay military dictatorship since 1973 to 1985, 12 years. And I was 13 when it started, and 25 when it was over. And so my love for freedom and for freedom of the press is in my blood.
Yes,
you know, that's why I am very passionate about fighting for freedom of the press and defend journalists from powerful people that
they want to keep their secrets.
Yeah, it is not a new thing.
Yes.
From all times there were problems between governments and powerful people and media or journalists or wherever. In 1644, for example, John Milton talked about against censorship in the Parliament of England. So we are talking about a thing that is part of history. Governments or powerful people trying not to run news that are interesting for people, because this kind of news can bother them, and journalists and other citizens trying to bring up this news to report the people what's going on.
So you were telling me before we started that you had just listened to something at the I.A.P.A. Just recently about espionage. Tell me about that.
Well, you know, the situation after September 11, 2001 in the United States has, in my opinion, has changed a lot in this matter.
In the world? Or
no,
here in the United States?
Here in the U.S. particularly.
Yes.
In Europe and in Western Europe also, but in the U.S. You have the First Amendment. You were the light for Latin American journalists that shined for us as the main example to follow about fighting for freedom of press and doing good journalism. When Watergate and the Pentagon Papers and those cases and much more, if Mr. Obama, the President of the United States, said, recognized it after the Snowden and so on case, recognized that the NSA has the power to know who talks to whom in the U.S. If the government knows who talks to whom, then the government knows who are the sources of the journalists. If the government knows who are the sources of the journalists, the sources are afraid, of course. And the people, not the journalists only, but the people get less and less informed about issues that of the incumbency of the people. So I read in a recent report delivered by CPJ a great report about this issue, but I would like to share with you just the two first paragraphs of this report that was written by Leonard Downey Jr., who was a former editor of the Washington Post. Here it says, if you allow to me, in the Obama administration's Washington, government officials are increasingly afraid to talk to the press. Those suspected of discussing with reporters anything that the government has classified as secret and subject to investigation, including lie detector tests and scrutiny of their telephone and email records. An insider threat program being implemented in every government department requires all federal employees to help prevent unauthorized disclosures of information by monitoring the behavior of their colleagues. 6 government employees, plus 2 contractors, including Edward Snowden, have been subject to felony criminal prosecution since 2009 under the 1917 Espionage Act, accused of leaking classified information to the press, compared with a total of 3 such prosecutions in all previous U.S. administrations. That's to me, as an admirer of U.S. as the example for freedom of the press, is shocking. And we in Latin America have governments that can use this to say, okay, if the U.S. can do this, why cannot us?
But so how do you combat this, given the technology, the pervasiveness of constantly changing?
I think journalists will have to go to the old-fashioned methods of gathering news, you know, not to call anybody, but to...
Not to put things online?
No, nothing.
So what I take from this is that the United States, in terms of freedom of the press, was once a virtuous paragon for you and people around the world, in your opinion, and it's declining.
It's declining.
The United States needs to do something to make that problem, to fix that problem.
Yes, the Justice Department has to set new rules because, of course, any government has to take decisions in order to avoid terrorism threats and avoid terrorism. But if you decide to avoid terrorism, and everything is security issues are always above the very freedoms that the founding fathers of this nation, and this country was built on those principles.